Okay, welcome. Today we have Guy Nixon with us, and it's not working. Oh, usually I have a voice that shatters glass, so I can. Guy Nixon is with us today, and he's going to speak on the history of Native Americans in our region and how this fits into the context of the larger picture. He's a lifelong resident of El Dorado County. He belongs to a family that's passionate about doing research, historical research, and you may have heard him on the radio. You may have seen him on the local TV channel. He did workshops for our group before the pandemic shut down, and very popular workshops. The members were really happy to have him and to learn from him. He's done extensive research, and he's brought publications that he has back here on the table. So after his presentation, we'll have questions and answers, and after the discussion, if anybody's interested in purchasing some of these publications or looking at them, Guy says he would take cash or check today, and if you do not have cash or check, but you're still interested in the publication, let him know, and as long as you give him some kind of contact information, he can contact you. Okay, I'd like to welcome Guy Nixon.
Well, good to see you, and I recognize about 9 of you from what we had before COVID shut everything down. Well, the rest are fairly, well, you weren't in that group, but I've seen you around, more or less. Give me the first slide on this to explain a little bit where this is coming from. I realized there's my dad's car, my grandpa, and some weird things, which is the reason I'm here. Now, my degree is in biology, ecology and DNA. My minor's in geology, so I ended up working for the Institute of Forest Genetics for many years, and I did the abandoned mine survey for the El Dorado and the Tahoe National Forest, and I enjoyed it. But I am one of those weirdos. And I usually come with these. Mr. Chapman's class in El Dorado High School, presidential elections of the 20th century, 9, 13, 21, 23, 29, 33, 45, 63, 69, 67, 81, and that class was in 84 in April. That test was on the 4th. I don't know why. I see you old Flanders going down the street. Oh, there's 3332748. I'm like, no. I shouldn't remember all that. All the Navy's gunnery codes, missile codes, all this stuff. I'm like, you know, there's only so much gray matter you have. Why is that stuck? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm one of those weird kind of people. Ooh, maybe black. Now, this is combined with the fact, this is my grandma and grandpa. Now, my grandpa ran a sawmill at Spanish Flat, which is over on the Georgetown Divide. He's there for kind of a different reason. And this pays into this. Why you're getting the thing on Native American stuff, this is why I've got the motivation and why I ended up with what I got. He got a college football scholarship to go to college. He was born in the Osage Nation. Mixed Osage, Cherokee, and some French way back there, and some Scottish. And a rich man driving across the bridge, the family farm there on the Salt Fork, the Arkansas River, says, "Hey son, you play football?" And Grandpa, "Yeah." Full ride scholarship to Haskell Indian College. Well, Billy Redcorn graduated, but he couldn't get work in the Midwest because of the blood competency laws. You have to prove that you are less than 1/2 Native American in order to have a business. Mr. Nixon, let's see your letter of competency. Well, actually, it was Mr. Redcorn. So Billy Redcorn left the Midwest, and Bill Nixon shows up here. My grandma's grandpa had come out here because Andrew Jackson told him they had to get out. His mom was Scottish, and his dad was Cherokee. And he just went through the Indian Territory. He ended up here in 43. And I get into that. Well, out here, it's hard to tell who is an Indian and who isn't an Indian. It gets a little difficult. You've got Hawaiians. You've got a lot of interesting things. You also have Copahembo in this county that really changes the dynamic. So my grandfather could run a sawmill in Spanish Flat. Him and Grandma could go to the movie theater in Georgetown, Placerville. Greenwood, cool. They could not sit together at the movie theater at all. Asian's not allowed to sit with a white girl. So as much as you see that as a black and white picture, at the time, in the 20s, no, he could not sit with her because he was an Indian at all. But in El Dorado County, no problems. So he's running a sawmill, and Georgetown was economically a powerhouse during the Great Depression because the gold is coming out. We had our own box factory where the current post office is. We had our own dairy farm. You've got little farms. You've got everybody. And it's a thriving community. And the elders of the Haudenosaunee and Washoe tribe, a lot of their kids are working the Alhambra and the Yellow Jacket gold mine for Wilbur Tim, of which my grandpa is making the beams for that as well as the neighboring houses. So they sit there and they talk. Now maybe they talk a little more to him, or maybe he got him to talk more. I don't really know. But as a little kid, the house that I bought when I was in the Navy was my grandparents' interest on it. It was built before there was plumbing and before there was electricity. So they big glass things with steel cables wrapped around it in the ceiling. I'm like, God, that's plug and post. You know, when I bought this thing. And all of the dry rot, the plumbing. Even before that, as a little kid, Dad would have to work on it. He'd trot me over there and sit me in front of Grandpa. And Grandpa would have these stories while Dad would be fixing things. And Grandpa had a lot of stories. Those stories, when I talked to George Peabody, who used to live out here at Hanks Exchange, a lot of them are the same story. But somebody has a name or a date or a place. And I've got one of those screwy Louie memories that does a lot. Now, the other one good is my dad's high school hot rod was Model T Ford, which he actually started driving in the 4th grade because he's delivering slabs. No, he did not have tires on it because tires were restricted due to the war. So he was driving around on steel rims, dirt roads. Well, my dad could drive out, and Dad would go out Hanks Exchange. He'd drive out Georgetown. Dad graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno, and he had all these friends. So Dad's idea of a summer vacation was 2.5 weeks going through northern and central Nevada, visiting all these ranchers friends of his. In the Model T, in the 70s, the old people would come out. Well, you had 2 restrictions. Either one, they would hide, or 2, they'd come out and talk because the sound of the Model T would instill their memories. And they'd come out and talk. Now we're going to church down here in Georgetown, El Dorado, the old El Dorado church. Reed Chatterton was the reverend. Why I remember his name, I have not got a clue. Myrtle Schuster was one of the took care of us little kids. She was sort of the Sunday school stuff. In her mid to late 80s, in the early 70s, Dad would give her a ride in the Model T, and she says, oh, her and her brother wanted to go to school. So that's why the family moved up to Nashville. They're on 49, so they could go to school. Well, I remember this story, and later I find out if you were an Indian in Amador County, you couldn't go to school until after the First World War. So that's why Nashville's a Miwok reservation. It's so kids could go to school. It took me in directions I wouldn't have known to look, but I enjoy research. So what I want to get into this is that when you get history, it's dynamic. It's moving. When somebody says something, I realize that everything is in flux. So, as you get the next picture coming up here. You got it? You'll get these maps. And this is especially true to a lot of things. Because of my research, I found the stories fascinating, but the real thing of it is why? What is causing this event to happen? So you get these maps, roughly here's the Washoe. This is a strange name. You got somebody and you ask what it is. By the way, Indoc is not Glasgow, it's actually where our septic treatment plant is, but it's better to say Glasgow. And I have different names. Do a next map, if you would. This is trying to get a little more accurate, although it looks like it's still out of focus. Let's go to another one.
No, it's just too small.
Yeah, that would make sense. Hit another one. Now, you've got Haudenosaunee and Haudenosaunee. Old man at Grandpa's sawmill talking about the creation flood. Now, okay, thanks, I got that from Grandpa. Then, in 1984, my father gets the job of finding out what's the biggest hydraulic events in California, because he's working for the Bureau of Reclamation. And he finds out that Bartolome Ferrallo is going up the coast of California in 1543, and there's a big flood. He actually sails around the buttes. Wait a minute. Which way do you sail around the buttes, Dad? He sailed up the west side and came down the east side. The tribal story talks about seeing the great turtle going between them and the buttes going south. They're on Chipmunk Ridge, just north of Georgetown. As you go up Wentworth Springs, that's where they're looking from. If you have never seen a 1540s vintage sailing ship, the Law Victoria, what is that? But it's a big flood. And that story would have been about the same as, say, our tales of Daniel Boone to today is from then to when this old guy's at the sawmill. A lot of these stories I find out, wait a minute, there's a good reason for it. It correlates. There's events that cause things. And this is a big thing into, especially Diamond Springs as we go further. Okay, get me another picture up here. This is actually more true. Now this is the very best they could come up with. And I have the different maps. These are all different tribes, and they're not the same people. And this is a very good one to have. The Siaknama, which would be in this region, their prophet Moritz stood at 7'4". Yolosko was so light-complected that he would wear a mask when he made raids against the Californios, because without a mask, he was lighter complected than almost any Spaniard. But they're full-blooded Indian. On the other hand, the Moclelos and Moclenes up there, 5'6", very, very dark complected. Now, these are all very different tribes, and these are newer. The Washoe is the oldest tribe. They got in here probably 12 to 14,000 years ago, and Banat on Muluk, which is where the gas station is right up the street here, you know, the inexpensive gas on the left where 49 takes off, that dates back probably 14,000 years. And they are the Marty's complex. They found this place and they liked it. Their language and their DNA is like nobody else's. Now, the Hilnisanon are the southernmost of the Maiduan people. Ethnically, when you say Maiduan, it's like saying Germanic. People in Denmark, all the way down to the people of Switzerland, are Germanic. But they may not speak a language anybody understands one another, and you're going to have regional dialects and regional variations. When you get down here, it just explodes in genetic diversity and languages. It's just, there's a lot more different peoples, and they're much more recent. And I say this is what, you know, gets everybody up there. Gord, I'll take a common one. Comancheria is Texas. In the 1700s, the Comanches lived in Wyoming. In the 1700s, the Sioux Indians were all in Minnesota. They never had saw the Black Hills. So it's when. When is where is, you know, relative terms come into this. When everybody's, I've been here forever. Well, yeah, if you ask the story, that's true. But where in here forever do you mean? This can be a little bit of a trick, and you find these things out. These tribes, as well as every one of your ancestors, were affected by the eruption of Mount Tambora, and this changes the whole dynamic of everything. Tambora goes off in Indonesia, and about a third or better of the population of Japan starves to death. They figure out how to eat puffer fish. They fly carp kites because the crops failed. China is devastated. The people in Poland, the ground remained frozen for 3 years solid. They pulled up roots and went to New Orleans. Whole towns of Germans and Poles did this. The wolves in Siberia had no lemmings to eat and no saiga antelope to eat. And suddenly Siberian wolves were showing up in central France. It was snowing in southern Italy in July. Red snow. And then we have to throw into this, another little part to this. You see, Little Red Riding Hood. God, that's a stupid idea. Why don't I send the daughter out here to take groceries to Granny through the snow? Napoleon's first through the 8th Coalition Wars devastated every able-bodied man there was. Then you have this cataclysmic thing that everybody in the Northern Hemisphere is starving to death because people in New England are watching ducks fall out of the sky in August 21st. Of 1813 in Massachusetts because it's that cold. Thus, climate is just whacked. So you send your little daughter with groceries to grandma because you don't have a choice. Once you see what's behind these stories, you suddenly go, wait a minute, the motivation is not, nobody in their sane mind sends the little daughter in a Red Riding Hood to go do this with the wolf in the snow and all this business. Same thing goes to the tribal stuff. And you have to go, there's things that are affecting this that are beyond the story, but it makes it more understandable. I'm down doing insect research down here off of Highway 4. Met a man, he's related to Telequac. I found that out with everything. And he tells me a story that was related to him by his great-great-grandfather or somebody like that line. And he says, I can't understand why it is, but the thing is, if you're going along, you come up on a village, you look at the moss. If the moss is hanging down from those trees, you get away from that village. You back up, you avoid it at all costs. If the moss is gathered up as high as a person can reach, go on in there. They probably got food, they might want to trade with you. We coordinate this. Where are you going to have Spanish moss he's referring to? This would have been Amador, Calaveras County, probably closer to the valley floor. The moss is used for diapers. If the moss is hanging down, nobody's having babies. They're under stress. They might very well be cannibals because of the conditions in which there was a lot of cannibalism. Calaveras County isn't named that way by accident. It's named that way because when Sanchez comes across all these skeletons, he's seen the remains of intertribal warfare due to a famine that affected everybody in the northern hemisphere of this planet. So we now know when that story comes from. We also know where. So the story in of itself gives you clues if you know what you're looking for to say, I can tell you about where it had to have been and about when it had to have been. It's the same thing as you see a deer track. Oh, that's wonderful. How is that track laid? Did he put his dew claws down? Okay, it means the ankle's worn out. It's probably an older animal. Is the front hooves splayed out right and left, or are they tracking center? If they're splayed out right and left, the neck is heavy, it's probably a buck. Then the question comes, when? If you see a centipede track across it, you go, that bug only moves at night because the birds will get it. If on the other hand, you see where it's stepped over a centipede trail, but you see where a gray squirrel's dusted his tail, well, they don't do that until the late afternoon. So if the track is fresh and you've got the breeze, you know that buck went through there not very long ago. It's not the track, but the context in which it lays gives you so much information. My grandpa loved to teach the art and science of tracking, and it helped me with finding lost people for the Forest Service. I asked, we were looking for a missing woman one time. I said, has she had a baby in the last year and a half? And they said, yes, she did. Then it's this set of tracks. Because it caused the pelvis to expand and the woman walks differently until that all heals up. That helped to find that woman. There's differences in all mammals, and you can also tell the difference between a rattlesnake track and a gopher snake. Gopher snake is a constrictor, rattlesnake is a pit viper. So the rattlesnake has to shove his gut over every time, and you see that slough mark. Doesn't mean if he's a little one, he still walks the same way. But he doesn't walk the way a gopher snake does. And everybody, well, gopher snake looks like a rattlesnake. Yeah, but they walk different. What do you mean walk? They're a different animal. This is the art and the science. So when you're putting these stories together, there's a lot to it. And I try to not only have the story, but here's what we know was going on, and this helps to give you the why did this story happen. So hit the next one up there. This is going into more of it. Now, Miwok has now been given a name to a much larger group. All these tribes are fighting one another as a result of the famine. They speak very different languages. They are genetically very different. The Awani up in Yosemite National Park are Shoshone. They're completely different. We go, oh, those are Sierra Nevada Miwok. No, they actually speak a Shoshone language, which is comparable to what you have over in Inyo County. They're the same people, but they get lumped. And Europeans love to lump things, and sometimes they're not as lumpable as we'd like. All right. Now, Miwok will make a big thing to this, but this is not actually the name of the group. It is when this is made, but it's not exactly the name, and I'll get into it. Okay, give me the next slide. This is probably my best map of the Washoe, and I know the date of the map. At least I know the age of the Washoe who gave the description, because down here, he's got Spanish Flat. Spanish Flat changed its name in '54. So this guy knows of it, it loses prominence by 62. So between 54 and 62 is when the Washoe describing this boundary had to have given the description. And this gives them the outer range and then where their summer range is. Copihambo is a result of the eruption of Mount Tambora. And I'm going to kind of start this with him. Tambora goes off and the Washoe can't get to their summer range. This sits in the snow. So just above Spanish Flat out here on Meadowbrook is a refugee camp. It's refugee Indians due to this famine. And this is where Hajupe and Winesino met. Now, Winesino was born right down the street here, where the gymnasium is to the Herbert Green Elementary School. That was Kelapakan, and we know that it was inhabited for a little over 800 to 1,000 years. And it was a walled town, and it was abandoned due to slave raids from the Californios. And they had pulled back to north of the South Fork of the American River as a defense against slave raids. And he meets Hajupe, and Copihambo then is their child. This is a strange time for California because of the sheep. The Padres bring sheep, and the sheep will eat the native bunch grass right down the roots and kill it. And the weeds that come off from the sheep wool are not the semi-domesticated grain crops that so many of the tribes in the Southern Coast Range and the Sierra Nevada foothills, and even clear up here in Garden Valley, depend on. In the 1852 meeting between Telequoc and Copihambo, Richard Steele says there's around 700 to 800 warriors at Valley of the Moon, which is Nopachitotoma, which, if you know where the old Kelsey Schoolhouse is, and you go start like you're going to the high school, before you get to the first creek, that's off to the right. Jeff Holloway owns the place now, and we're trying to replant that native bunch grass there. If you have 700 warriors, the complementary number of women and children that you'd associate with a hunter-gatherer society would be a little over 2,800 people. That's more than the whole of the Chiricahua Apache. You don't have numbers of people like that living off of deer and acorns. Their semi-domesticated grain crops are evidence if you go down Wintun Lane, which if you go off of Meadowbrook Road, takes off to the right. There's a whole bunch of grinding rocks. There's the ones for the acorns. There's also the ones sideways for grinding grain, which tells you where they were grinding grain. So you see these figures, oh, they're messing with this grass seed. Well, we now know from testing the DNA, which thanks to work for the Institute of Forest Genetics, I met a lot of folks, that's their deal. The Walker River Delta going into Walker Lake near Urington, Nevada, the Namu Paiute rye shows that it has been selectively cultivated for a little over 2,000 years from its wild origins. Well, this is how you get domestic plants. The fact that it grows as a bunch grass and you don't have to plow the ground and replant it year-round, every year, like you do wheat, means that to the Europeans it's not a crop. But Marlin, the sub-chief of the Numu Paiute, before COVID, was invited back to China because they're now planting the Numu's bunch grass in the Horn of Africa, extreme Western China and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, because it's drought tolerant, fire resistant, and it doesn't cause the soil erosion due to wind. Because once you plant it, it just keeps growing. It makes about a 3/4 long seed, which makes a delicious bread, according to Mr. Fremont, who enjoyed it, commenting about this bread. So these populations, the South Shore of Lake Tahoe, which the cattleman said was just wonderful, the cows were so fat. Well, actually that was cultivated grain fields. We had no idea, they didn't realize what they were at, but yeah, the potato war with the Washoe up here off of Honey Lake, yeah, it's because they plowed up the grain fields and planted potatoes. Yeah, that's what we know from the grinding rocks, that's precisely what they were doing. That's what supports a population of that size. All right, give me the next one, let's see what we've got here. And this is coming out here, Hill Nisenan Valley, Nisenan. Nisenan's southern Maidu, and realize the Maiduans go all the way up here to the edge of the Yana, and then the southern down here is Yahi. The Yahi and Yana, we know, did nothing with them. And this is when I'm talking about different tribes. The Hill Nisenan and the Pomo and different tribes in the south, they figured out, where did I put that? Did I bring it in? I know I brought it. What did I do with it? The small black case. Well, flip up another picture. I made it up. No. Flip up another picture.
Here?
No. I probably left the darn thing in the truck. Anyway, so bring up the next picture. The arrowheads. Well, I don't know if I have that picture, but I'll get it. You ever heard of bird points? And everybody goes, God, look at those ignorant Indians. They're shooting these underpowered bows with these ridiculously tiny arrows. What kind of an idiot would do that? God, they're a bunch of morons. Well, in point of fact, the Yahi and Yana had to use the same 3/4 inch wide cutting head that you find in Europe, Asia, Africa, Middle East, as you do with my Osage kin, and the Cherokee, and the Choctaw, the Sioux, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne. It's got to have about a 3/4 inch or better wide cutting head. That's because we didn't have access to the neurotoxin. Somebody over here at the Hill Nisenan, around 1,200 years ago, figured out how to derive the enzyme-based neurotoxin from one of the 5 varieties of daddy long-legged spiders. And not only did they extract, but they refined and were able to stabilize that enzyme-based neurotoxin. So if you get one of them arrows out of the University of Nevada, University of Berkeley, if one of those gets under your skin, in about 3 minutes you'll be assuming room temperature. And of course, all the pharmacies are now, pharmaceutical interests are like, how did those witch doctors figure this out? Well, are they witch doctors or biochemical engineers? It gets a little bit questionable. And you see, in a land in which your whole burial practices, much of your religion is based around grizzly bears. If you bury the dead, the grizzly bear will dig them up and your deceased relative will be drug all over the place. You have to bury the dead because of the freaking grizzly bears. You have to put your acorns up. You have to really do a lot to try to protect yourself against grizzly bears. I have taken a lot of game animals. I'll bring up another picture or two here. Let's see where it is. Oh, that's Copahembo. I'll get into him. Let's see. Do I have it? I'm probably a little bit out of order to it. Anyways, and he's probably a good question to put in this. If you try to kill a bear, and let's pick a man who looks like a bear. If you are a grizzly bear, which anatomically you are close, so am I, but I can't do it myself so good. You cannot hemorrhagically wound with a 3/4 inch wide blade anything here, because you can't get to it. There's a cartilaginous sheath, big thick hide, long hair, usually covered in mud, and a skull that's pretty darn thick. You can't get in the shoulder blade. It's massive. It's very hard to get. You can't get the rump. Let's say you've got him in the rump. You'll go over there and tear him to pieces and say, you know, you hurt me. The only way to do it is if his shoulder is forward to try to get between the overlapping ribs, which in this case would be this way. So you have to get quartering behind shot in order to have any effect. And as a hemorrhagic wound, see, you only get one lung, not both. That bear's going to be alive for half an hour, in which time he can kill you, tear you up, and it is a major problem. The advantage of the neurotoxin, probably the reason they're developing this, is that it suddenly changes the whole scheme. You don't want a big arrow. You don't want him to even feel it. You want to poke him in the butt, just get under the hide, and the neurotoxin will drop him in about 3 minutes. And he thought he just got scratched in the berry patch. That's why we find bird points in elk and deer and grizzly bears. It's not that they're a bunch of ignorant, stupid, moronic Indians. No, it's they have a real whammy. They've got technology. Just because they don't have access to the bronze, to Crete, and they're able to develop the Bronze Age, which, by the way, the Cherokee were already pretty much up to the level of the Greek Republic when it comes to bronze technology, just they didn't have the volume of copper to make as much. But the tin, the alloy stuff, we now know for Hawaii Island, they were that far advanced. They were probably going to get into the Iron Age in another 100 or 200 years. They were making those advancements. Out here, we don't have the copper, but somebody figures out neurotoxins that are, and how do you stabilize an enzyme neurotoxin? And we can't replicate it yet. As genius as we are, we haven't been able to replicate what them witch doctors did. Now, he's armed with some of those arrows. Like I said, his mother is Washishu, his father's Hill Nisenan. And they are having problems with slave raiders. The Ranchos, I ought to give this, how many are you familiar with Speedy Gonzales, the cartoon character? And then there's a cousin of Slowpoke Rodriguez. Cousin Slowpoke is showing, it's a caricature of precisely what happens to many people doing agricultural work in the valleys of northern and central Mexico and southern California and part of the Coast Range. What we call valley fever, which is an encysted fungus in the dust. If you inhale that, it'll start growing in your lungs, very likely to kill you. On the other hand, if it does not kill you, it will cause you to have the pot belly, an insatiable appetite, total lethargy, and you really aren't that sharp. And to make point of this, how this will affect the population, let's take the grapes of wrath. You take all these people from the panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. They get out there and are working the southern San Joaquin, and just south of Bakersfield was Weed Patch. It was a federal government camp. When they actually tested the people, 1/4 of the people that came to that camp were positive for valley fever. The infant mortality rate was 43%. That is equivalent to the Ethiopian refugees of the famine in the 1980s that were coming into northern Kenya. And that's Anglo-Americans, but that's their effect of that disease. And it's causing them to have just an appetite that can't be satisfied. They don't put on the weight. They've got a little bit of a pot belly. They have a phenomenal infant mortality rate because they're suffering from that disease of storing the dirt. So the minute the ranchos or the padres start trying to take wild Indians who have been farming bunch grasses, and now they're plowing the dirt, inhaling the dust behind a mule, an ox, or a donkey, you're getting all those wonderful fungal infections causing a tremendous change in the population. Not to mention diet. I don't see anyone in this room that has the cauliflower ear that 20, 30 years ago would have been probably 10 to 15% of the population in this room. That was due to dietary issues of the 20s and 30s. Kids that grew up in the teens, 20s, and 30s, many in the Midwest, even some people up here on the Montana border, you would end up with an enlarged ear. It's kind of called cauliflower ear. You can remember people that might have looked that way. That's due to a vitamin deficiency. Goiters if you don't have iodized salt. Well, this is affecting these tribes that are put on these missions. And the mortality rate goes through the roof. We also know, because of the Russians, how this is affecting them. The Russians ran an expedition down, and they didn't want to step on the toes of the Spanish king too much, but they realized they did have Fort Ross up here, which is the southernmost of the Russian colonies. The Russian scientists go down to Monterey and San Luis Obispo, and they go, God, the mission Indians are so much shorter and they're stupid compared to the wild Indians who are much taller and are quick-witted. Well, this is the same thing as Speedy Gonzales and his cousin of Slowpoke Rodriguez. They're the same genetically, but on the diet and exposed to these pathogens, you are causing these people to behave, look, act very, very differently. Now, the expansion of the ranchos and the missions, and particularly the destruction of the native bunch grass, particularly by sheep, not so much by cattle, but by the domestic sheep, is displacing tribes. And here comes Mount Tambora. Wham! Okay, we're going to go to the mission because there's nothing else. Unfortunately, Junipero Serra, I really don't see why anybody is thinking of trying to make a saint out of him. Father Duran, on the other hand, could be made a saint. Father Duran really tried to help the Indians. Junipero Serra was modifying the reports that went to the Catholic diocese. He was deep-sixing files and reports from other padres that didn't make him look good. And his policies, if anything, make the SS look a little bit like nice guys or altar boys. I mean, it's like, geez, what else would you expect to happen? You're feeding people out of a trough, and then you have to throw in the soldiers. California was never really part of Mexico. It was part of the Spanish Empire. But even as part of the Spanish Empire, it was the I above the letter, the dot above the letter I in the word of shit to the Spanish Empire. They are out there. They are the end of nowhere. And as a result, the Catholic Church sent problem priests here, and also the soldiers that are out here. When Napoleon invades Spain and puts his brother Joseph on the throne, your boss? I mean, Mexico goes through a massive civil war, revolution. I mean, our American Revolution comparably had about as many people as Mexico, and we lost around 10,000 military casualties. Mexico looked closer to 125,000. They weren't prepared to become an independent country. They become an independent country because Spain suddenly is under the French. So not only does this mean that these soldiers are French, there is no Spain. To who's your boss? And they sure as heck aren't going to listen to Junipero Serra say, well, you're the tower of virtue. They did whatever they wanted. Who's in charge? Who's paying the bill? Nobody's paying their bill. They're going to make money whatever way they can or do whatever they want. And Northern California and Southern California aren't on the same page either. They fight each other. So the only time they ever got together is when when President, General, Dictator Santa Anna, remember, he only made Presidente of Mexico once by rigged election. The other 11 times was by revolution. I mean, that's 12 times he's the head of the country, and it's just... Every time Vallejo writes a letter to Mexico City, it's as likely as not, by the time the letter gets back, within 8 different administrations. The toilet paper would have more value than what's written on it. So, Santa Anna sends Miguel Turena with an army of convicts, because they don't risk any really good soldiers. It's the only time Northern California and Southern California actually fought together against anything. Whatever we want, we don't want you! Other than that, they're busy fighting each other. So, when we talk about these things, the slave raids that are going on is because of the economic system, the La Comida of the Spanish Empire, of which the Californios that end up with what? They're not getting any help from Mexico. Mexico is tearing itself apart in just a series of wars and changing administrations. There's nothing coming out here. So there's real fear of the Russians stepping in. Gee, where's that come from? And then the British, of course, then there's Americans. But anyways, he is the result of the famine, and then his father being born right up the street, these slave raids. You're losing people in these missions, in these ranchos, because you're tilling up the bunch grass, you're getting these fungus cysts. You are, in essence, you couldn't expect the population to thrive. They are really going to be on the hurting side of it. So you need more and more people to do this. And he gets the name Copahembo. Interestingly enough, him and two buddies go from basically Kelsey, and they are going to go down across to what's now Mosquito, Swansboro, about where the pond is, which is a Chutoma, and a grizzly bear attacks them, probably because they were carrying smoked salmon. And the buddies left him for dead. They figured he was dead. He was mauled, they saw him getting thrown around, and he comes walking into Chutoma 2 days later with the bear's hide. Now, according to my dad's grammar school teacher, he was horribly scarred and disfigured from that. But he was a frequent guest speaker at the Kelsey one-room schoolhouse when Margaret Kelly started teaching in 1886. He was a big proponent of education, and he had made allies of Caleb Greenwood and Brett Greenwood. This is Old Man Greenwood's sons, who, by the way, are half Crow Indian, as well as Richard Steele and other Oregon trappers. And I'll get into more on him. Give me another slide, I think, coming up. Yeah, here's Margaret Kelly's class. If you get a lot of her pictures, many of these students are Indians because Copahembo helps build the very first elementary schools in El Dorado County, the Kelsey, Bear Creek, and the Greenwood Elementary School, at which Kelsey and Greenwood are still standing. As such, since he helps to build the schools, and he's really an upstanding figure in the community, you can't tell the Indian kids they can't go to school. So if you get the next picture there, I think it's coming. Here's my dad, who looks like a clone for my third son. Like, my mother can't tell the difference on them. There's African Americans, there's Hawaiians, Indians, all in one room schoolhouse. So we had a fully racially integrated school system from the very beginning, which is actually very outstanding to point that out. Everybody, oh, you're from Georgetown, you're from El Dorado County, you must be some redneck racist. Well, no, actually, I am redneck, yes, and I am a hillbilly, but racist, no, we're not. Very definitive point. Point of fact, no, we're not. Okay, the next picture. Now, this is interesting in to say that when the 49ers show up, you are seeing tribes that are recovering from a series of events that we know were different in the past. This was flexible body armor, helmets, the whole 9 gear for fighting major battles in which you could not run. You have to defend, and this only happens, you only develop armor in an agrarian society that has fixed villages, probably of 600 to 700 people per village. We know that the flood of 1543 would have devastated the agricultural community. Then here comes the Spanish, then you have all these diseases, yet there's evidence in the tribes of things that you won't develop unless you're an agricultural society that's fighting major battles comparable to what you would have had in Syria, in the Fertile Crescent, beginning the Bronze Age. You can even go, we now know that where the Battle of Bulge was fought, they've now found evidence there was a Stone Age battle there in which there was probably over 40 to 60,000 soldiers fighting in the Stone Age. Fixed villages, they're agricultural, so they're in the Stone Age. That's when you're going to develop those kind of technologies, is when you have populations and a agricultural society of a population density about that. Otherwise, you don't develop it. Why would you waste the time on it? What do we got next? Oh, this is another one that I've come up on here. Let's see how I wanted to come off of that. I had a heck of a time. He did my level best. I'm trying to find the pictures for this, and they get kind of... All right, your Washoe. Everybody loves the Washoe. All these tribes might fight one another, but they all like the Washoe. And I'll ask somebody, did you like McDonald's French fries in the last 20 years? But who did? But what? Why did their fries taste different? The McDonald's French fries tasted different. This is why the Washoe, everybody loves them. Because it's not sodium chloride, it's alum chloride. It's a pickling salt. And if you take, actually, we can go backwards and forwards, right?
Yeah.
All right, go to the next picture. Oh, way in the basket. Because it's the dog economy, and the dog doesn't carry a basket very well. You gotta remember, horses didn't get here until the Europeans. The Washoe traded salt, and everybody loves McDonald's French fry salt. And they sit in the passes. If you're going to get through from the Great Basin to California, and it doesn't matter if you live in San Francisco, and you've got all the salt you want, McDonald's French fry salt tastes great. And even if you live at the Great Salt Lake, you're somewhere out in Nevada, McDonald's French fry salt tastes great. Now, if you back up the one frame before that, they also have access to jackrabbits. Jackrabbits in Nevada can be killed by driving them into nets. You club a gazillion jackrabbits, you peel the skin, and you weave blankets out of it. It's incredibly soft. It's really nice stuff. And their trade in salt and blankets, let alone all the other trade goods, makes them something everybody likes. Even if you hate the other guy, man, you want to know the Washoe. Now go up another frame or so here. Now the salt works, so the next one isn't a little piker thing. This is down off of 4, and I'm not allowed, according to the Forest Service, to tell you exactly where. That's man-made. This salt works has been running for a little over 7,000 years. You go to the next picture, and these are considerable. And I'm in there going, what the heck? And wait a minute. That's McDonald's French fry salt. So I scraped some up, and I went back and I tested them. I thought, yeah, no wonder. It's not just salt. Why didn't anybody else do it? It's alum chloride, which would make sense because there's an alum lake and the deer all come there. So here we go with the next picture. And of course, the Washoe Lake, there's hot springs. Why wouldn't you? It's a little miniature version of Yosemite. If you go to Markleeville, go up the hot springs. By the way, those didn't burn with fire, so you still go up there. It's beautiful, all the hot water coming out of the ground. Come on, it is a paradise. You can see why they've been there for 12 to 14,000 years. They've got McDonald's French fry salt. They got the hot springs. Everybody loves them, and they're on the trade market. They know about stuff. So everybody thinks the Indians they're some sort of ignorant, they're living in total isolation in the wilderness. No, actually, they've got their finger on the pulse. They know what's going on. Kotahembo knew all about smallpox. They knew about the disease that rotted the skin from your face. They knew full well about that. So when Richard Steele One of Caleb Greenwood's buddies, Oregon trapper, said, I'm going to go down the valley. Somebody's got cowpox. I'm going to get vaccinated against smallpox. Kopahembo and Captain Juan, the primary hook or chief, if Sitting Bull can be a chief and he's in charge of 300 people, freaking Captain Juan with 2,800 people is a chief. Everybody's, oh, they're not called chief. Well, if the number of people he's in charge of, yeah, I'd call that a chief. He said, show us how this works. Richard Steele demonstrated right here at Chicken Flat. He had the pus, he had the blister, ruptured that, got the pus, and inoculated as many Hill-Nisanon and Washoe as it would do. Kopahembo takes that and runs with it. So in 58, a smallpox epidemic hit Georgetown that killed a little over half of the people attending the Catholic Church in Georgetown. The Hill-Nisanon lost a 5 out of 2,800 people. I'd say that's a pretty good vaccination program. He's thinking outside the box. He's really doing something, and I give a lot of credit there. Okay, let's go to the next picture. This is actually making a jackrabbit skin blanket. That was Bill, and I can't pronounce the last name, Numupayu, the next picture. And I'm going to go on the next one. And that was him demonstrating the bow, which was actually sinew-backed and using Pacific U. How much time do I have?
About an hour. 3 hours.
Last thing I ought to ask.
You have 10 more minutes speaking and then questions and answers.
Okay, so I got to do it. I figured because I can go on. Okay, give me the next picture. Now, this goes into stuff. A lot of people ask me on things, and I'm going to go into the other tribes. But there's the Win. If you find this, it's a knife. This, it's the Pleistocene. This is used to knock off mastodons in Newcastle. So if you're trying to knock off an elephant, but his tusks come out of the bottom instead of the top in Newcastle, you use one of these things off of the stick with the over-the-head lateral. Versus this is up to the modern age. It could only be like 200 years ago. It's a great knife. If you subdue it, go to the next picture. Now there's a black-tailed deer that I took using Osage style flint arrowheads on cedar shafts with left-wing turkey fletching. You see, because I'm right-handed, according to Grandpa, you want to use the left wing because the helical twist of the arrow will cause it to rotate away from the bow. If you were left-handed, you want right-wing feathers. And my grandfather's little kid, as a teenager, was hunting pronghorn antelope off the west end of the Osage Nation on horseback with those arrows. So it's not that far away. If you get the next picture, there I am actually using a obsidian knife. It works just fine. It's much like a ginsu. It's a serrated knife. So everybody says, it's the Stone Age. Well, no, it's actually, it's pretty effective. Next picture, that's Bill again. And they're showing that. Now, this is key. The Hill-Nisanon and further north are the same ethnicity, and they speak, Ukrainian isn't Russian, but it's close, if you will. The people, what they're speaking in Switzerland is not the same as what they're speaking in Denmark, but you can see the gradation of that. All these tribes to the south of El Dorado County are really many very different tribes. Junipero Serra so mismanages the missions that the mission San Jose has a revolt. This is Chief Stanislao and Telequoc realize what's happening to their people, and they enable a little over 400 to 500 people in a mass escape from Mission San Jose. They go to the foothills, out of the reach, well, at least out of the main reach of the Californios. Northern Californios, not to mix with Southern California, and they begin waging a war against the Californios. And the name Miwok would not even be a name if it wasn't for a bird. One bird. And I don't have that bird, but I have it. There's a picture of it. I thought I had that here. Where is that? This is my sister making a rendition of it. A raven. A raven shows up. It is a wild raven. Its tongue was not split. If you split the tongue on a raven, it can enunciate human words. So all these tribes, even though they are different ethnicities, they all hold the raven as a special animal. Because if you clip the tongue on one of them, they all mimic human words. There's something magical about that bird, plus which they're pretty darn smart. And I will give you how smart they are. This is honest to God truth, and I have 5 living witnesses. High school era, my dad thought the neat thing would be to take the blue van and go down to Death Valley, Furnace Creek for 2 or 3 days, and then we come back. We're down at Furnace Creek, Death Valley, and Dad makes the worst blueberry pancake I've ever seen. And my sister and I are like, no, Dad, we've really had enough. My mother, no. And so Dad's watching, and there's ravens on top of every RV areas out there, right? And everybody's coming by with French fries or hamburger, and they're bagging it, right? Dad takes this blueberry stuff, and he rakes it off behind this sand berm, and this big raven comes out there. Gets a good beak full, and he's like this. Every feather turns backwards, and I look on top of every RV, there's ravens going. They're watching. And I'm like, Dad, you gagged the raven. Dad, oh, shut up about that. All right. So I come out there, I went and got some French fries, like the next day or something. I raked them off there. Not a bird would touch that. The next year we came back. We weren't in the same space at Furnace Creek. And Dad's got the leftover bacon stuff. He rakes it out, and none of the ravens. How do they know? And then here comes a roadrunner. Top knot up, head up, body up, tail down, tail up, step, 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 body down, tail down, head down, top knot up, head up. And he goes over to get a beak full of that stuff, and he's looking. And all the ravens are like this. He turns direction and and I'm like, how do those birds know? This is a whole year later. Yeah, we were in the blue van, so I didn't recognize Dad, but anyways, these are wild ravens. This one raven picks telequack. Telequack goes out to go deer hunting, and then down, it's right about where Ripon is, or an elk, and he would call where there were elk or deer. And he'd hit the deer or the elk, and the raven would call out where the animal went down, which you see in Africa for the bee hunters, the honey hunters. Those birds will do that. Well, this bird did it for telequack, not for other Indian warriors. And here comes Sanchez and his group of lancers, and they are going to fix those Indians for good. And he comes out there with his cavalry, and he's riding down telequack. He's about to skewer him, big sticker him. And that raven hit him in the head, took out an eye, caused him to fall off the horse, and died the next day from his injuries. And the word of this got around to the other tribes. He's got a bird. It's not just any bird. Now, this, of course, is an insult to the pride of the Californios. So they send their very best. General Vallejo, who had just got done with the Battle of Tules, where they've been able to take a bunch of Indian slaves, he's got cavalry, he's got cannon, he's got infantry, he's got the whole 9 yards. And the tribesmen had set up fortifications. He shows up, and they're firing the cannon at the Indians, and the Indians are shooting back. And the Indians had trenches, so the bullets are going over them. They come out with their lancers, and the freaking raven took out 3 of the lancers. Then they have a whole squad of infantrymen, and the raven gets in apparently a dead oak tree and does this grr, 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 and they shoot at the raven, and none of them hit him. 69 caliber round ball out of Spanish muskets. Okay, yeah, the bird probably had a pretty good chance, but the fact that none of them did hit him, they called him a bruja, a witch, an evil spirit, fill in the blanks. And at the end of the battle, it is Telequac, also known as Jose Jesus, do the next picture, and Estanislao drive Vallejo all the way back to San Jose and steal an additional 7,000 horses, and then show up on the holy day where Father Duran is and say, we want to be pardoned for it because we followed the tenets of the Catholic Church. We did not violate anything. We want to have a full pardon. They got it. So the Californians are still steamed about this. Now back up one picture. No, up this way.
Yep.
Back
Coming.
up. When Fremont calls for volunteers it's the Mexican-American War, but here you're not fighting Mexico. You're fighting 3 different factions two of which the factions are fighting each other. And you've got the Bear Flag Republic, and some who just kind of want to stay just an independent republic. Most of them are siding with Fremont. Telequoc can't, I mean, he is hot to join. Oh, I want the list. That list.
Oh, the list, I'm sorry.
Back one. This is Company H of Fremont's volunteers, commanded by Jose Jesus. All the members in this are, quote, Miwok. They're Miwok because Miwok is not a tribal name, it's a military confederation name. All these different tribes join and ride under the name Miwok because they are the ones executing these battles against the Californios. So when we say Miwok, there's different languages, different ethnicities, different everything, but they unite under a common banner because Telequoc has a bird. And the bird is holy to all these different tribes. They see that as something, and then it picked this man, and the bird can do these things. I'm joining him. I might have fought his kin in the past, especially with the result of the famine, but I will unite against the common enemy, particularly because he's got this bird. And Fremont's volunteers say, well, that mascot of the Company H is something else. That pretty neat bird. And, I mean, some of these guys, the Californios had cut him off, and one of them jumped over the barricade, said, I'll get help, jumps over the barricades. The Lancers come in, he grabs the lance, skewers the Lancer, jumps on the horse, takes out two more Lancers, rides the horse to death, gets to Fremont's group and brings back the relief column. I mean, these guys, apparently they would come up, the Californios are putting up a good fight, and just like you see the cheerleaders, when they'll get on their backs, on their down like this with their backs, and the other guys jump over the back, they would do that in the Californios. We surrender! Because these guys are motivated. They really do not like the Californios one bit. And at the surrender of Northern California to Fremont, the Californio general, that's what they refer to them as, Californio, not Mexican, there's a big swiggle on his signature. Apparently, the raven was in the tree above the table, which the tree is still alive, and as he's signing it, he does this, and he's scared enough of their bird. So the stories that Myrtle Schuster told me about the bird, and then in doing the research, I realized, and then in talking to Telequoc's probably third great grandson, down when I'm doing insect research, I'm realizing, yeah, now I understand why this bird is so significant. This is what brings unity to a group of people, groups of people that don't have anything other than a common enemy, but have been fighting each other for much longer. They unify because of a bird. Okay, next one. And go on after that one. Now, when it gets weird, when everybody's talking about the treaties and stuff like this, I wish I had more than knowing that there was a one. List of half-breeds who withdrawn from treaty, 12th of July, 1886. Yeah, when you talk about later and talking to Wapunis and other tribes, it's like, yeah, it's all over the place. I'm not trying to give it what I know and where I can research it, but realize you're going to have all kinds of weird things that happen. Okay, give me the next one. Now, this is right over here in Georgetown. The Hill-Nisanon Washoe mix integrated. There was no big massacre. They didn't get relegated to a reservation. Copahemo helps build their elementary schools. They go to elementary school and they integrate. We had a tremendous Native American population in Georgetown in the 1930s. It's doing great. They had their spring bear dance and everything else. What clobbered them is affecting your pocketbook right now. Executive Order 6102, FDR, Executive Order, you are not allowed to own gold. You can have a wedding ring and one coin, otherwise you are now a felon of the federal government. And you must hand over all your gold to the U.S. government at $16 an ounce, no more. Right now, or you are a felon. FDR passes that, Executive Order. Well, that really hammered our economy. Georgetown, Placerville, all the gold country. It also debased our currency when he moved off the gold. Now, as a side effect of that, everybody's saying that the Chinese communities were run out of the gold country because of racism. And they'll lose the noose bunch here back with the Biden and the last election. The Chinese communities were vital. If you go up to Georgetown and you see the gas station, you see those Chinese tree of heaven in there, that used to be the opium den. And this becomes the Chinatown. They are essential. Because if you're mining gold, if you find gold, the federal government says $16 an ounce. That's what you get. If you went to the Chinaman, you got closer to fair market value. The Chinese laundry, the Chinese restaurant, that's nice. But really what supports those communities is the gold exchange. It is not until the fall of Nanking, when the Japanese destroy the last viable port of China, that suddenly the Chinatowns begin to just disappear. It's not the laundromat or the restaurant or whatever other services that they provide, it's the gold exchange. Their access to the world market made them vital. And as Grandpa said, they didn't care whether they hated the Chinaman. They didn't care if the most racist SOB on the planet. I ain't going to change and get only $15 for an ounce of gold, and I get $35 to $36 an ounce for gold. I'd be an idiot. Very true. Money talks, and all the rest walks. So if you really want the truth of it, 6102 changed a lot of the economy. It also destroyed the economy for Georgetown with putting the gold mines out of business. And if you're trying to raise wife and kids, how are you going to do it if the economy goes downhill? And this breaks the cultural continuity. And it has to be taken into account. This is what's really altering things. Give me the next one. Another one that I have, the book up here, Slavery in the West. A lot of people don't realize it was perfectly legal to buy, sell, and own Native Americans legally, even in California, until 1911. They were not legal persons. They were not U.S. citizens. And this is a Native American slave. And use them in different labor. Perfectly fine to do that. Do the next picture. Mexico would continue to sell Native Americans as slave labor up until 1936. They sold 12,000 to the Bolivian mining consortium. This is them weighing a Terra Homera girl before selling her. And that was going on. So there was a tremendous amount of that, which just sort of slides under the thing. You don't see that. Okay, the next picture, I got to hurry. That's Porter's store at that corner from my place. Dad picked up an ice cream on his way home from school. The Kelsey Schoolhouse is out that way. That and the town of Louisville burned up due to a Japanese incendiary balloon in World War II. Dad remembers the El Dorado County Sheriff coming in and saying, children, Japanese are launching these balloons. It probably has a bottle of kerosene and a hand grenade in it. Do not touch it. Go to the Kelsey, the Kelsey grocery store. They have a telephone. Call the sheriff, deputy, show the deputy where it is, and don't touch it. And one of Dad's older classmates had 7 of the papier-mâché bases. The Japanese were using the Girl Scouts to make the bases, and they would sign off on them. And a lot of these wouldn't go off, and he found peace. So he had 7 of the bases. And the real idea of the fire thing, which of course would be tremendously effective when you look at the Caldor fire. The fuel loading was much less then, but they wanted to find out how long it took for the balloons to get from Japan to here, because Professor Ishii had been very successfully killed 34,000 people in Manchuria by contaminating water supplies with cholera. So if he knew how long it took for the balloons to come, he had biological agents for diphtheria, hoof and mouth, cholera, and a couple others that if he knew how long it took the balloons to get, he could load the balloons. So the Japanese submarines sat off the coast and listened for reports of the big fires. At least the media then was patriotic, and they weren't reporting the fires, plus which Dad can remember from the top of our hill. Be a fire here, there, over there, another one, 2 more start, and there's nobody in the woods. There's no human beings out there because everybody's with the war effort. So it's interesting to correlate that. That's the neat one I have with the about the Panther thing here in Iowa Hill. Pass the next one. I know I got it. Rupley grade. The Apple Hill Cafe. Granny Rupley was 6'8". She was Cheniers Osage and Scottish mix, and she was teaching the local tribes people English, mathematics, and American stuff, how to be an American. And so you call that a rancheria. It's not a state rancheria, it's not a federal rancheria, it's their ranch, and she feels she wants to help. And her Russian husband is all for that. Okay, in the next picture. This is my dad and grandpa. And if you will, just, I know, what, down to 3 minutes or so?
Sure.
Grandpa, of course, he's Osage. He comes here, if you get the next slide, this is his cousin, John Matthews, and this is my personal tie to that. Matthews volunteered for the cavalry in the First World War. He ended up in the American Escadrille, And he was the first American pilot to score an air-to-air combat kill. He got a Fokker D-7 while flying a SPAD out of Petite, France. And at the end of the war, he's teaching combat aviation, specializing in night fighting. This is the Great War. This is pre-radar. And of course, the Germans were able to go over Paris and London at night in the fog with their Zeppelins. Totally quiet and do terror bombing. And how to fight this, how to combat this, how to fight at night. And so the British government, at the end of the war, give him a scholarship to Oxford. So he's the very first Native American to go to Oxford. He graduated in 3 years with honors. And he applied to the League of Nations to work as their geologist. Got the job, went to Switzerland, married a Swiss girl. When he goes back to Oklahoma, he could not write a check from his own checking account because he's an incompetent Indian. He could not verify he's less than Indian, less than half Indian by blood, and who's got records? Honestly, everybody's born at home for generations. How can you? His service record was the top of the congressional bill that in 1927 gave Native Americans the right of citizenship. Not all of them, because you don't have the voting until Ira Hayes comes back from World War II, Iwo Jima, and he still can't vote. So it's a little bit, before it's completed. But this ended the you can't run a business, you're an incompetent, and you can't write a check from your own checking account business. 1911 ends the legal slavery of Native Americans, mostly because a Catholic church in New Mexico was selling the offspring of the girls that the Padres had bought. And the Catholic Church came down on them. They said, well, it's perfectly legal. It identified the problem, and so then the open sale of slaves auctions in Los Angeles and Santa Monica and Monterey had to come to an end there in 1910, and it was finally outlawed in 1911. So it's just my little tie to that. We'll go to the next picture. That is Maria Tallchief. She was the first American to make prima ballerina of Europe. She was Osage. So as much as we're a small tribe, or more or less, I think a pretty big tribe. And you go to the next picture. That is the first Bill Nixon, for which my dad and grandpa made name for my grandpa's grandpa. Big long name to this, which they get the business to it. The next picture is him. His family ran a store in the Osage Reserve. And at the time, he had learned French, Spanish, and English. Choctaw Creek Comanche. He was fluent to read and write in the French, English, and Spanish, and he was sent across the river to the Osage mission to learn German from Father Schulemacher, and he also got all the way up to calculus. And so that is Grandpa's grandpa wearing his business suit. For the Kansas legislature, he corrected them as to the amortization of their loan payments for requiring them to sell their lands in Kansas, to which they were like, and forced them that all of their contracts had to be written in English and French, both. So, anyways. And that's probably a good thing of what all armaments he had during the American Civil War. He ended up getting a Henry rifle because we grabbed the J.R. Williams and sold the Union payroll and bought a bunch of repeating rifles. And then we had the dress clothes, so it made us the best armed and dressed force in the Confederacy at the time. Mostly because we're, trying to keep the Kansas redlegs out of the homeland. Next one. And this is the original Osage territory. So when you talk about times, we look at where tribes are. Obviously, I'm just doing this one for the tribe, just because it's my Osage. So yeah, we're actually a pretty good sized tribe. And the other one that I like to give on this is there's always different reasons in any conflict, and everybody knows what the reasons for the Civil War are. The reason my ancestors joined the Confederacy is because Senator Jim Lane wanted to sell the Indian Territory to settlers. If you remember the Ingalls, Laura Ingalls Wilder, and the Osage chief comes out and informs them in English and French, no, this is not the land you're allowed to settle on. Well, Senator Jim Lane couldn't get the federal government to remove the Indians, because that's where they've removed the Indians to, and the Indians are doing what they're supposed to do. So he gets the Redlegs to nominally free slaves. Well, there's no slaves to free because the Osage don't practice slavery. We won't take a slave, we won't take a prisoner of war either. We'll break your right elbow and turn you loose so that you're a problem to your tribe, and a good memory, don't come over and hassle the Osage, we'll break your right arm if we don't kill you. Anyways, Joe Van was a Cherokee who had gone to college there, and he had got into shipping. And Joe's smoked meats were being sold in Paris, Lisbon, and Madrid. That's why they eat at Joe's commercials. It was considered a delicacy. Well, he's forced out to the Indian Territory, and Weber's Falls, and he finds that he's got another product as well as all his meats and stuff. He has steam-augmented sailing ships going to Europe. The Indian tribes are taking petroleum seeps and deriving lamp oil. Well, he starts the Indian Territorial Illuminating Oil Company, and it sells like hotcakes in Lisbon, Paris, and Madrid, because unlike conventional whale oil, it doesn't go rancid and stink. So all the housewives love Joe's smoked meats. They also love Joe's lamp oil. Senator Jim Lane gets a whole pile of guns from the Yankee whalers, because their primary mission is to destroy Indian oil refineries. So why do we go to war? Well, because we're fighting against the guys that are destroying our oil refineries. It's a little different. The history is convoluted. There's often many reasons for things, and I just give that. And I probably run out of time, so, yep. Anyways, I will take answers and questions to whatever. Yeah. Yeah, what's your question?
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. That was so impressive. I wondered if you had heard of Edward Curtis, who apparently worked under patronage from J.P. Morgan, and for 30 years went throughout North America, took pictures of...
Yeah, the photo essays.
Yeah, and I guess the 20-volume set that he put together sold for $3,000, thank you know. Just
That makes sense.
Yeah, just amazing.
I know they also had a fair number of stage props, so some of his, especially the Northern Cheyenne, are dressed in Sioux outfit, and they're like, that's where a lot of their thing was, you know, the Sioux get the glory, the Crow get the land, and the Cheyenne did all the fighting story. It's actually part of the pictures, because they were forced to, you know, they didn't have the war regalia, but, you know, they put on the stuff that he had. And, you know, we're taking pictures like a bunch of Sioux Indians. We're the guys that kicked Sutter's butt, but on the other hand, we didn't get the land, and we don't get the glory for it either. So that's where that comment actually is derived from that photo essay.
Well, this is a very affordable copy compared to the $3,000 version, and it's just loaded with fabulous photos.
Oh, yeah.
So, thank
He
you.
does really good. Ah, the fellow right there, I caught him.
You went kind of fast past the Mount Tambora volcanic eruption.
Mount Tambora,
And where is it? What's it called?
Indonesia. And that was followed by Al Savant in the Caribbean, and then there was 2 other volcanoes in Russia, and 1 volcano in Alaska, and you also had that one in the Rift Valley of Africa. They all went off about the same time. But Tambora is the one that the British recorded the sound of it over 800 miles away. They thought it was cannon fire, and then you had people on islands 400 miles away that were dead within feet of their house. They died because it blacked out. There was no light at all for like 6 to 8 days as the dust cloud went over, so people died not being able to find their house or water or food, and they thought it was the end of the world. The tsunami, of course, caused everything in the Indian Ocean basin, and the even parts of the Mindanao got a tidal wave a little over 30 feet high that just took out a lot of the stuff. So it caused a massive problem there, and the British recorded. But the reddish debris in the volcanic eruption is the reason that so many of the sleighs being chased by wolves in Europe pictures have a reddish tint. Well, that's the reason there's the reddish tint. It's the prolonged winter and this excessive cold spell that's bizarre as a result of that eruption. The others didn't
What year
have.
was that? What year?
1812.
1812?
It reminds me of a friend I have in Queens, New York, who complained to me about the Caldor fire smoke.
Oh yeah, exactly. And you can imagine that. That's a micro of having a whole mountain get blown off the face of the earth.
I was wondering if you could clarify the local controversy between the Wampanoags and the Rancheria.
Oh yeah.
Why not?
Let me give people the quick to that. There's no Miwok indigenous to El Dorado County as per that one very accurate map. Telequoc, the leader of Company H, makes good friends with Charles Weber. Charles Weber's wife, she's one of the Murphy girls. I think she's Jane Murphy. They are Irish political refugees that Greenwood took in the first time he found the pass coming in, okay? And Charles Weber beats feet to come over here to see one of these beautiful Irish girls, and he ends up marrying her. Helen Murphy. Well, her brother marries Tellequoc's daughter. So Murphy's California and all that, they're all kin. And Helen Murphy raises hell with Don Amador. Don Amador made his money harvesting children, which is the euphemism for grabbing Indians and then selling them. Okay? That's how he made the money to support his 4 wives, 32 kids, and everything else that he had over after he already obfuscated with land from the mission in San Jose that should have gone to the tribesmen, but he did some wrangling and basically strung the priest up with a rope to get that property. Helen Murphy raises hell with him. So Tellequoc and Charles Weber get together and actually build the foundations of Stockton. Then when the gold rush happens, Charles Weber hires Tellequoc for tribesmen to dig Pole Mill Creek, which we now call Weber's Creek. Well, those people are living right here in Diamond Springs. The flood of 1861 put Sacramento under 10 feet of water, Stockton under 14 feet of water, and 23 villages of the Plains Miwok were put under the drink. The refugees from that flood came here in large part because you're trying to get out of the water. The people in Diamond Springs and people in Placerville came up to where it's now your Big Cut Gap and looked at the smoke because the children were dying from the effects of cholera and the contaminated water from the flood. They felt so bad about it. People from Placerville were bringing food, blankets, and medical supplies, as were the people here in Diamond Springs, and realized Hanks Exchange was where many of the Miwok that came to work for Charles Weber were living. So we ended up with a Miwok population. Now, many of those people stayed. They integrated. Arnold's for Awards, relatives of that. I went to school with Tammy Arnold. Very fully integrated, everything like that. Then you have another group coming up from Amador County to Nashville. This would include Myrtle Schuster, Miwok that want to access education, wanted kids to be able to go to school. That's a significant increase in our Miwok population. Many of these are the same families as what are in the Jackson Ranch area are the ones that came to Nashville. Okay? Now, the Shingle Springs Rancheria is federal, but it was set aside as, if you need a place to be, here it is. But it doesn't designate which group. It was very vague. And in 1972, there was nobody on it. There hadn't been anybody on it. So there was a big hunt in the county to find anybody alive that descended from the group of here. What do you want to do with it? And everybody's like, well, yeah, I might have had an ancestor that was there, but I got a successful business. I'm probably not, And then you can only live there. It's dry most of the year. I mean, it's nothing but a bunch of dry grass and poison oak, with a few live oak trees. I mean, it's pretty much zip. So there was no consensus because they couldn't find anybody. The Sac Verona, they qualify as Miwok because they were part of that military confederation. That name does not define a tribe. It defines a military confederation, which included Pomo, which is probably what they are. They could be Wintun, you can call them a couple different things, and they're probably a conglomeration of a few things, including a lot of Pacific Islander. They saw an opportunity that what few... Caesar tends to shoot himself in the foot every time he opens his mouth and he's not in prison. He did not help the Wapunis one bit. And I say that in all honesty, and I tried to help him. But the Sac Verona had the horsepower. They saw that there was nothing saying that they couldn't. So they did. What, did they appropriate the name of the Wapunis? No, they didn't appropriate the local tribal name. They did appropriate an identity, but they are probably were part of the Miwok Confederation. The stipulations, plus was the deregulation of Indian gaming laws, and I'm not going to get into the dirty laundry of Hunchup, but Hunchup drove a lot of the Nashville group in different directions. He wasn't a good leader. He is Caesar's second great-grandfather. He's seen as a leader of those Miwok, but a lot of the Miwok didn't like him. And there's reasons for that, and that's dirty laundry, which I won't get into. So they were disconnected. So there is a valid point the Wapunis have. On the other hand, the Sac Verona have put in tremendous asset in the community. They have done a large part to making better medical stuff. They've really done a good thing. If the only way you can make this happy is either you, with a magic wand, remove everything from that land and move the Sac Verona right up there to the National Forest ground, which is now covered with Afghanistan pine, about 2 miles up Highway 50, and their operation went in there. In which case, the Wapumis can sit out there, and would they even now have the horsepower to do much with it? So those few that are in the Wapumis with it, I give a lot to them. I've tried to help them, and they have some valid stuff, and I'm trying to work. But on the other hand, would they have been able to take out the loans? Remember, the Sac Verona were threatened by the Reno mob, the Tahoe mob, the actual mob, plus which they were sued by the Jackson Rancheria. And they were able to cough up the money and the threats on their lives in person, and they did an awful lot to make that go. Would our local tribe have been able to stand up to the Tahoe mob? Those guys are pretty intimidating, and they are, especially there in the 70s. That's the age of the Godfather. That's them. So there's a lot to it, and you can't rule out greed, and you can't rule out dirty laundry that's in there. There's a lot of factors to it. So both sides have good points, but the way that land was set aside did not specify that it had to be somebody from a tribe within 50 miles or anything like that. And the 1972, trying to find anybody, nobody showed up. The tribes that were very proud of it, they have businesses, they've got orchards, they've got ranches. They're like, do whatever, if somebody has less than me, go ahead. I could have used Native American stuff for my as a scholarship to college. I said, no, I'm joining the Navy. I went through the Navy, I paid on my way through college. I'll leave that scholarship money for somebody that deserves it. I'm able to do it on my own, in which case I'm not going to ask to take this. That's a little bit why, it's just the way you come off with some of the stuff.
Other questions?
Sir, what can you tell us about Volcanoville?
Volcanoville?
Yeah, the history and what happened to it, please.
Oh, I have a whole lot to that, but I have to be back by 3:30 for the kids, and I can do that for about an hour and a half. Volcanoville is an enclave, and due to Senator Morell's value-added tax, which happened under the Lincoln administration, many people out here, including the Chinese, were flying Confederate flags and thought that Abraham Lincoln was dying of a disease, which in fact was, and this caused a great number of them to look into their own, whatever they could do to try to supply their own needs. And because the Sacramento Valley had been turned into mush by the 61 flood, that's why Parrots Ferry and all those landings, ferry landings, are so vital, because you can't get heavy equipment across mud. And all the roads coming across from Salt Lake City, oxen sank up to their belly in the mud, and they had to leave them. It just destroyed the infrastructure. So Volcanoville found that they could take the manzanita from Cockrobin Point, which is shaggy bark manzanita, and the super bright yellowish red clay, and they created their own iron ore, and were casting steam engine parts and stamp mills and everything like that. And then they were cabling it across to Ralston and Long Canyon and the Hornblende Mountain complex, basically the Georgia Slide Mine and its areas. And so I found these enormous castings from that man's nose to mine long, about yay high, this wide, and it's made in Volcanoville. I'm like, how on earth did they get this here? It's cabled in. And they did an incredible amount of industry with that. The town burned down 6 times, 7 if you count the last one, but only burned half the town down. And there's a lot to it. So Volcanoville has a very fascinating history. If you drive out there, you're like, boy, you're out in the middle of nowhere. No, actually, it was the middle of everywhere for quite a while.
Other questions?
What do you do in real life?
Well, I was substitute teaching after working for the Forest Service and for the county's vector control, and running amok with my Muppets and running my little sawmill and teaching.
And what do you do in your spare time?
Run the sawmill and run amok with my Muppets. I got 4 sons and a daughter. The wife wanted a daughter.
Amazing.
Almost got as bad as the Pizzola factor. My wife didn't like that. I remember going to school right here at Charles Brown Elementary, and Miss Carter goes, "You're a Pizzola." And I'm like, and I go, "Which one are you?" And the kid next to me goes, "I'm Mario Pizzola." She goes, "I've gone to class, school, taught for 14 years, and there's been a Pizzola boy there every single year." "Yeah, which are you?" "Well, I'm Mario." "Well, who's left?" "Well, I got 2 little brothers. My mom's got a sister. Finally had a daughter." You know, it's like, no, dear, we're not having a Pizzola factor, but we came, you know.
Other questions?
You talk too slow.
So anyways, I've got to get it together, but I have books on a lot of the different tribe stuff, and because we were having classes and everything, you'll often see, I get the Imperial Printing can do these up cheaper, less expensive than a publisher can do. So that's why sometimes you see the same thing, either because I was trying to make it less expensive for the students that were coming in before COVID shut everything down on us with that one.
We thank you so much.